Hey everybody. Um, Earlier I did a video, kind of a first pass at this guitar, this Yamaha FG800. And I said that, I'm going to bring up some notes here. I said that I wanted to do a deeper dive, and there's a good reason for that. I've talked before in some of my other videos, especially the one that I did on my Martin MMV Custom, about the fact that I primarily, as an acoustic guitar player in my life, played a Martin D18. I got out of the Navy right at the beginning of 1976, and I went to a guitar store with everything that the Navy paid me on my way out and bought myself a brand new Martin D28. And I played it for a while, and I liked it, but there just was something about it that wasn't for me. And I ended up taking it back to the music store and trading it for, I want to say I got a Guild D25, which was it was a mahogany guitar with a cherry finish on it. And I loved that guitar, and I had it for a long time, but shortly after that, I ended up getting a Martin D18. And through a series of trades and, just being young and not really knowing what I was doing, I ended up getting rid of both of those guitars. Well, later in life, and not much later, it wasn't too long after that, a buddy of mine who I call my brother, I mean, my son's named after him. I spent, a lot of my youth and a good part of my adult life with him, as my best friend and somebody that I went everywhere with and did a lot of things with. He was a guy that was interesting character, but he would come into big sums of money and he would just go out and spend it. His thing in life was, if you got it, spend it, no big deal. And so he would always buy me cool stuff, And of course, when he was down in the dumps and he didn't have any money, I would give him money. So it was, it was kind of a fair exchange. But he knew I loved guitars, and he would buy me the best stuff. He got me a 1941 Martin D18 that had belonged to Hank Williams Sr. in a transaction where he owned a motorcycle shop, and guys would always come in trading him stuff for work on their motorcycles. And a kid named Tim McNett, who was the nephew of Bob McNett, who was in Hank Williams' band at one time, came in with a guitar and swore that it was a guitar that Hank had owned himself. And through a number of years of checking on its history, I came to find out that there was a good possibility that was the case. So I had that guitar for 30 some years, and it got to a point living in Florida where, first of all, I'm not a good enough guitar player to warrant me having something worth that kind of money. And secondly, I was always concerned because I couldn't get it insured for what I thought it was worth, and turns out it was worth one heck of a lot of money. So I was always worried about it, something happening to it, and honestly wanted somebody to have it that, could do it more justice than I could. So about 6 years ago, I ended up selling it, and I had missed having a Martin D18 since. And I had told my wife, I said, when the right one comes along, I'll get another one. But I ended up with the MMV. I ended up with a whole bunch of other acoustics. I had a Guild D245. I had a Epiphone Hummingbird Artist Series guitar. I had a bunch of Epiphones. I had, just a handful of acoustics that just never did anything for me. I got the Martin MMV, and I love that guitar. But it's a stepping stone back to another D18, and I'm looking right now. I've found a couple. I went to a place called Maple Street Guitars in Atlanta. My daughter's boyfriend took me there, and I met the son of the founder, who dealt with every rock band that came through the South, for years. The place is legendary. he put a D18 in my hands that was probably the nicest one they had. And when we left, my wife said, "Why didn't you buy that?" And I was like, "I don't know. Why did I?" The bottom line was it didn't happen. And so I ended up with the MMV. It's been a couple years now. I was really busy and didn't have a lot of time. Like if you look at my YouTube channel, you'll know that there was a big gap between me making videos, and I've got a lot of other stuff going on, so I just really haven't had time and didn't want to make the investment until I was ready to play. So that's a very long story about Martin and D18s. And the reason I'm telling you that is I have that little Rode guitar up in my house in Georgia, and it's really an awful guitar. I mean, honestly, I've done everything I can to make it playable, and it plays okay, but it sounds terrible. And I just, I kind of cringe every time I play it. And so I thought, I'm not ready to get a D18 because my wife and I are in the middle of trying to figure out how we're going to move. And I don't want to have that guitar until I'm settled down. It's going to be hard enough for me to get rid of all the other guitars I have and decide what I want to keep and move them and do all that stuff. So I figured when I'm in that place, I'll do it. But in the meantime, I want to have a guitar to play up in Georgia that I like, because that little Rode guitar ain't doing it. And I don't want to take my Martin up there. The house isn't climate controlled right now, so I leave that at the house here in Florida. And so I go to Guitar Center all the time. I got a bunch of buddies at the Guitar Center in Port St. Lucie, Florida, who I like, and they're nice guys. They're kind of captured by the corporate crap that's happening at Guitar Center, but I've known some of them from other music stores for almost 20 years. So we have a great rapport, and I go in there sometimes just to talk and shoot the crap, and other times to actually look for guitars, and I end up with guitars every once in a while. But on all my trips in there, I kept gravitating towards this one guitar in the acoustic room, and it wasn't in the high-end room because they have the rooms separated. They got the Gibsons and the Martins and the Taylors and some high-end PRSs in one room, and then they have all the other stuff in another room. They got the ones that are made out of Formica, I call it, the Martins, and they have the low-end baby Taylors and a bunch of stuff that I'm not really interested in. But this Yamaha kept popping up, this FG800. And so I watched a video a couple years ago about the fact that it had a solid spruce top, and it doesn't say in any of the literature, but because it doesn't say that it has solid mahogany sides, I'm assuming that it's laminated mahogany sides. And a mahogany neck. It's got a satin finish on the neck. Some of the other specs are that it's got scallop bracing, which is a lot like a Martin. And when I was reading about it in another publication online, they were talking about how they designed the guitar. And I know that Yamaha has always been innovative in the musical instrument world. My mom was a piano teacher and an opera singer when I was a kid, and my father was a clarinet player, and I don't think anybody in our family except for me probably ever heard him play the piano, but he was concert pianist. I mean, he could have easily have been a performing and top end classical musician, but he had 5 kids, and he was a physicist and a chemist, and so he had to go where the money was to raise 5 kids. So he became a plant engineer in the manufacturing business, and never really went back to music, except one night after my mom passed away, he and I were sitting around having a couple of drinks, and he went over to the piano, and I'd never heard him play before, and I had played piano pretty much my whole life, and I was like blown out of my shoes, man. I mean, it was amazing. But so when my mom was a piano teacher, she had 2 baby grand pianos back to back, and she would get 2 students, and they would do duets, and she would put on these recitals where she would invite people to the house, and then occasionally she would have a recital at a public venue. And she had a lot of students in Southern California and East Los Angeles, and then they moved back east to the Baltimore area, and she had a relatively robust group of students. Um, but she had a Baldwin piano, a Baldwin baby grand, and a Kimball baby grand, and they were both really nice pianos. She told me she wanted a Steinway, and she ultimately ended up having a Steinway concert grand in her house in Maryland before she passed away. But along the way, she told me, she goes, you know, Bobby, if I was going to go buy a new baby grand piano, and this is probably in the 80s, she told me I would go buy a Yamaha. And she said, you know, Yamaha makes guitars. And I said, Mom, Yamaha guitars suck. The action's terrible. They're like at the bottom rung of the guitar line. You know, I told her, I said, Martins, Gibsons, and custom made acoustics. I said, that's where it's at. Well, again, you know, 40 years later, here I am going into Guitar Center. I'm playing this little FG800. I'm reading about it. I'm reading how Yamaha designed it. You know, the way that my mom told me they designed pianos in the day. And I'm realizing this is probably one of the most underrated acoustic guitars ever made. It's the retail price on this thing is like $230, and I actually picked this one up today for $140 at Guitar Center. And I'm going to tell you, it's very similar to a D18 because of the mahogany back and sides and this solid spruce top. It's funny because I was watching a video with a gal from Martin Guitar one day talking about the fact that a guy made a paper mache guitar and put a spruce top on it, and it was a beautiful sounding guitar, and everybody in the industry agreed. And what he said, or what she said that he said, or that he proved, was that you can put anything on the back and sides as long as the top is the right soundboard. And to me, this guitar is considered a beginner's guitar, and I'm telling you, every time I go to Guitar Center and I see people playing guitars, they've got, you know, the stuff, everything except what's in the cool room, you know, with the high-end Taylors, Martins, and Gibsons. And I'll be honest with you, I owned a Gibson J45, and I prefer this guitar over that. So that should say something. I'm not the best guitar player in the world, but I've got an ear that's very, very acute at being able to determine, you know, what sounds good. This thing has a walnut fingerboard, a walnut bridge. It wasn't set up very well when I got it today. I brought it home, I took the strings off, I adjusted the truss rod. The nut is cut beautifully. The frets are absolutely spectacular. The neck was straight, but it did have some relief in it, so I had to take that out with the truss rod adjustment. I would probably replace the nut and the saddle. I had to cut the saddle down probably a 1/16 of an inch. I mean, the action was really high. Now it's very playable. I would replace the pins with bone pins, replace the saddle with the compensated bone saddle, and replace the nut with I would custom make a bone nut for it myself. The tuners, you know, they're not expensive, but they are smooth as butter. This satin neck is slick, and my hand moves up and down it nicely. And again, with my arthritic hands, I have to have a guitar that's easy to play, or I have a hard time. It's a slim taper. It's very thin, like a Martin neck. It's got a 15.75 radius, almost 16-inch radius, like a Martin would have. I'm telling you, and I use, I had a set of them. I'm going to get out of the camera range for a second and see if I can pull them up. I've always used Martin Marquis strings my entire life, and these are the Martin Marquis silk strings. But I made an online purchase, and I guess I don't have any of them left. I got the unsilked strings, and I thought, you know, I'm going to use those on my cheaper guitars, because on my Martins, the silked end is the silk goes around. It's wrapped. The thread's wrapped around the end near the ball, so that it doesn't tear up the bridge holes. And so I've always been conscious of that because I do a lot of string changes on my acoustics, unlike my electrics. So, but I figured I'd use that last set of unsilk strings I had in here because if I damage it, it's not going to be the end of the world. And you know, that's another thing about this guitar. Even brand new at $229, if you drop the thing, it's no big deal. But like I said, I got this for 149 bucks, and I mean, it's got figuring in the wood on the back. The top is solid spruce, and the grain is very tight. It's just I'm just amazed by this guitar, and I think, like I said, this could be one of those things that in 20 years people pick these up and say, "Holy cow! Who would have thought that this guitar would sound so good?" You know. I mean, the resonance is amazing. The harmonics, the sustain. I don't consider this a beginner level guitar. I mean, you know, it's funny. I used to be a tequila drinker, and I don't drink tequila anymore, but there was, you know, people were buying $60 bottles of Patron and some of these higher end tequilas, and I was buying this stuff called El Jimador because it was $20 a bottle. But honestly, I would taste it compared to everything else, and it tasted good to me. And I thought, you know, I don't know what these other people see in this expensive tequila, but you know, I'll just keep drinking my El Jimador. Well, I was in North Florida visiting my daughter's boyfriend a couple months ago, and I went into a bar, and the guy that owned the place was he had owned Mexican restaurants all over the world, and he was really successful. And this was just one of his one of the places he owned, and he was just, you know, kind of stopping in to check on it. And he sat down at the bar and had a drink with me, and you know, we got to talking, and I said, "I'm going to ask you something. You got these, you know, you have you know, $200-300 bottles of tequila here. You've got, you know, the low end. You've got your house brand." I said, "If it was up to you and you could drink anything you wanted, what would you drink?" And he said, "You know, I grew up in Tasco, Mexico," and he said there were, you know, the Jimadors are the guys that process the agave plant to make the tequila. He said, "You know, I grew up with some of the best tequilas in the world," and he said, "Being successful in the bar business, I've been able to offer $1,000 bottles and $20 bottles." And he said, "For my money, El Jimador is where it's at." And I laughed, and I said, "You know, all my buddies gave me a hard time about El Jimador because it was $21 a bottle, and they were drinking a $50 Patron, which I thought tasted like garbage." And, you know, that's how I feel about this guitar. This is a $229 guitar that's at the very top of what you can buy other than a high-end Gibson, Martin, Taylor, or a boutique build. And, you know, hats off to Yamaha. I might just have gotten a really good one in this case, but I got to tell you, you know, this is an amazing guitar. So anyways, that's my 2 cents. And like I said, I was glad to be able to do a little sound test on it and talk a little bit more about it. Probably talked way too long because I'm real good at that. But anyways, hope you enjoyed it, and hope you have a fantastic day.